Playing makes us human. All humans play. Some human play is so alive that just to witness it happening is enlivening. Often, that play involves structured, partially pre-planned or scripted, mimetic role play, performed in real time and space, what we now call drama. The sparsely surviving records from before the year 1485 in England bear witness to ubiquitous playing, Robin Hood folk games, for instance. But it's usually difficult to determine from the records whether or not a given medieval English play was dramatic, and whether or not it was scripted. The medieval English considered all types of play and game generically continuous, but never called any of it drama or theater, let alone literature or high art. So few play scripts were preserved with much care. In the fall of 2020, we read from most of the medieval English play scripts that do survive from before 1485. That is, from the roughly recognized canon of indisputably dramatic texts. Since early witnesses suggest that most medieval poetry was conceived for live performance, we might rightly consider much Anglo-Saxon poetry, especially those short Exeter book pieces that feel as much like fragments of plays as known later fragments do, as examples of pre-urbanized English dramatic monologues. The maimed extant half of the Pride of Life, a morality play whose mirthful allegory for mortality, health, and income inequality resonates as much today as during the Black Death, was itself mortal, destroyed in 1922. Fabliaux, like the campily misogynist, anti-clerical Dame Sirith, which typifies how play texts might be inscribed as literary poems, or vice versa, with unspoken apparatus left off or inserted often in Latin after the fact, were less likely to survive visibly as plays than lay plays on sacred material, whose grassroots doxic Catholicism often took liberties that now feel unorthodox, like the York Joseph's Troubles, which reimagines Joseph as a Fabliaux stock character. If some of the overabundant jokes, songs, and implied gags in Mankind disgust modern readers, if we can resist our tendency to minimize, erase, or move them off stage, then they can help us see ways that our modernity may repress us. And, mercifully, they can loosen us up with laughter, because in pre-modern play, the reverent and irreverent shit need not be opposed. In liturgical drama performed by clergy as part of religious ritual, dramatic role-playing is at the core of the medieval sacred, enacted with grand interactivity among the nuns of Barking, with an embodied aliveness that, like the bodily humor of Lydgate's court disguisings, is very difficult to grasp unless you try to enact it using your own body in real visible space. Pre-theatrical plays, if read without real bodies moving through space, fall flat. They were not flat. Perhaps it is our readerly perception of play that has been flattened. Perhaps, in reading what remains of medieval plays, we can begin to change that. When the conspicuously learned play of Wisdom offers its black and white take on psychomorphic allegory, then, it lays out a typically contemplative diagram of consciousness using real bodies, dressed up in various genders and in gorgeous East Anglian costumes. Its internal profile of political corruption figures the corruption of understanding as a question of taste. Lydgate's mummings and disguisings were openly instrumental attempts to bolster the unsteady political power of Henry VI in London, but they did so with aureate flair, interactive engagement, and folksy bodily comedy. The plainly didactic instrumentality of occupation and idleness, when we decode its cues for bodily drunkenness and stage combat, cannot fail to delight as it teaches. We might guess that the Rains extract's fragment of delight was once meant to warn us against worldly aesthetics, but it does so with enough beauty that delight remains with us. And perhaps that is why Rains preserved that speech on its own. But the slapstick violence of the flagrantly anti-Semitic Croxton play of The Sacrament poses or provokes uneasy questions about how entertainment translates. Like all medieval plays, it seems to inhabit multiple contradictory positions about Christians and non-Christians, English and non-English, in ways that force us to acknowledge the heterogeneity of present-day positions, while confusing modern readers about how to understand the medieval source behind its extant 16th century copy. The biblical play cycles, in their historical content and in the contexts of their history, unsettle our modern idea of how drama relates to time. Local guilds who produced their plays semi-simultaneously on pageant carriages in major urban thoroughfares across the 15th and 16th century also sometimes had their texts revised or rewritten, with the flexible anachronistic playfulness that produced the varied extant depictions of Noah's wife, in surviving copies that do not distinguish newer material from old. The records at York attest repeatedly to the Guild's presentation of up to 52 different plays, of which 47 play texts survive in a copy datable to the 1460s or 1470s, across up to 16 pageant carriage stations, all on Corpus Christi Day. The practical impossibility of fitting so many performances into one day remains a subject of scholarly debate and impressive innovation. All but one of the 25 extant Chester plays survive only on copies from after 1590, plays that bear witness to the zaniness of medieval popular religion and to its prohibition. The relish the Chester Antichrist takes in its own spectacular contradiction embodies a chummier relationship to the unknowable than modernity can usually allow. This is take 2 of English 330-16, Camp and Chester. I recognize that everyone watching this lecture may be at different stages of progress in this week's reading. I'll do my best to take that into account and make this material useful to all. And I want to encourage you, by the way, that ever longer speech that I read at the beginning of the lectures, which changes a little bit every time, do listen to that every time, even though it tacks on quite a few minutes to our lecture length. The repetition of that material is meant to give you a foundation and anchor, a sort of mnemonic anchor in which you can locate all the stuff you've learned, right? I use complex language that, if you think about it, like you think about what I mean by the black and white depiction in wisdom, and it hopefully will spark a memory of what it is we've talked about in relation to that one term. So I've packed that speech with a bunch of dense terms like that, so that when you look back at that text, maybe years later, you can feel like you have something more than, oh yeah, I took a course in medieval drama. What is that again? You can have a somewhat succinct but dense summary, provocative summary of everything we've talked about so far. So that's the goal. So do watch it every time and notice the little changes that happen, because I'm also editing it as I go, so that you can also retain for a longer time what it is that you've worked through and thought through in this class. So, as you know, and so even though we're 7.5 minutes in, the lecture is really starting now. As you know, the Chester plays, like the York plays, continue to be performed well into the late 16th century, using texts that were continually subject to revision and rewriting. A changing that's kept in check somewhat by the guild's ceremoniously idealized claims that they were maintaining an ongoing, unchanging play tradition, so that they never indicated how much or how little content was actually revised or rewritten in any given year. But unlike the York plays, the Chester plays, blue arrow here, all but one of them survive only in copies from after 1590, with most of their spellings and usages updated and normalized at least to 16th century standard, so that we cannot separate the early content from the late. Most of our records from Chester are late too, like this one, from the Reed entry for 1532, which makes official an agreement among 3 of Chester's guilds: the Vintners, in whose play Herod meets the 3 kings that go to see the baby Jesus; the Goldsmiths, who did the Innocents play you're reading this week, or maybe have already read; and the Dyers, who did the Antichrist play that you're reading this week, or possibly have already read. Here, in this record, all 3 guilds go in on sharing the same pageant carriage stage. Maintaining, building, and storing these carriage stages were expensive, and they agreed to split the cost 3 ways. And that's only possible because at Chester, again unlike York, records witness that there were 26 plays, of which only 25 now survive, done across 3 days, as opposed to the 1 at York. When later records record that playing order, they put the Vintners' Herod and 3 Kings play on the Monday, the Goldsmiths' Innocents play on the Tuesday, and the Dyers' Antichrist play on the Wednesday, and thus they can share that same carriage across the 3 days. So let's start by jumping right into a close reading of the Chester Goldsmiths' play of the Innocents, because I believe it provides an ideal object lesson in identifying extraverbal cues, which is the name of the game for the second half of our semester, and in connecting those extraverbal cues to fundamental questions of performance style. So, There is currently no student-friendly glossed edition of the original texts of the Chester Antichrist and Innocence plays in print, other than a set of very iffy translations floating around out there somewhere. What you see is what you get here. This is the Early English Text Society edition, the same as the Chester Noah edition you read, with its manuscript variants at the bottom. And we should now easily be able to recognize Herod's opening bombastic speech in this play, which you're either about to read or already have read, both as establishing his tyrannical character, notice the Croxton-style alliteration, princes, prelates of price, barons, and blamner and bees, beware of me, all that been, etc. Right? Establishing his tyrannical character at a practical level, and gaining the spectator's attention around a locus, a single focus locus, which we know from the records to be that shared carriage stage, that pageant carriage. At line 9 here, he directs his speech, his attention-getting speech, out to all his subjects that are here been set, that are located right here. We should recognize that as referring clearly to the gathered spectators in the street, the audience. The variants at the bottom of the page sharpen that extraverbal picture, while 3 manuscripts have lines 7 to 8 as, for all this world lies to spare and acre to spill. The B&H manuscripts, following my cursor, have him say, for all this world under me lies to spare and acre to spill, which fleshes out both the poetic meter and the staging, implying that Herod's reference to the audience is from above them looking down, that is, from up on the carriage above the street. At line 73 in all manuscripts, here we are, that stage picture is reinforced. Herod's messenger says, hail, comely king, sitting on high. Now, of course, Herod would have a throne to sit in and give orders from. Of course, you can't have a street performer sit in a chair at street level because he would be invisible behind the gathered crowd. Of course, a throne would have to be pre-attached to the carriage stage, or else they'd have to lug the throne physically from location to location through the city. And that, of course, is why it is the vintners, dyers, and goldsmiths who are all going in on that same wagon. Each of their plays, you may have noticed, have central spectacular tyrants who sit on thrones. So each can use the same wagon with its big, gorgeous throne attached. A throne likely decorated with the goldsmith's gold, or their gold foil, and the dyer's brightly colored fabric. But there's more to be found here. Notice that Herod, at line 43, summons his messenger, which is Prat, his name, or Preco, to go into Judea this day to bid the knights to come. The messenger agrees to undertake this journey, which will require him to speed somewhere, lightly to leap over dale and down. So he goes, and after Herod offers him Mahone's blessing as a farewell, suddenly at line 57, here, he is with those 2 knights, that is, Primus Miles, first knight, and Secundus Miles, second knight. He's there with them. He is sent hither I am sent, to greet Sir Grimble and Sir Lancher Deep, by Herod, whom he speaks about, King Herod, as though he is no longer visible. Though, of course, we can still see Herod and his throne, where in the street, and if we want to, we can look up at the carriage. The knights welcome him to this new location, and then they agree to wend with him. With thee now I wend, I will wend with you in this same way. And then suddenly again, at line 73, where we were before, we greet the comely king sitting on high. If you were to be the one editing and translating this text, as you did Occupation and Idleness, you'd of course have to insert stage directions here after line 57 and here after line 73 that describe the performers moving visibly from one visible playing space to another. The place where the soldiers are initially located, that is, where the messenger must go to meet them, must be farther visibly away from Herod's throne and the carriage on which it is installed than the place that they all wend back to when they talk to Herod. Implied here, then, are 3 distinct levels. You have the street, Chester's platea, farthest from the throne, and you have the main carriage stage, which is Herod's court. And you have Herod's throne itself, on which he is sitting on high, which seems here installed on the carriage stage, but at a higher elevation, so that even when the actors get back onto the carriage stage to approach Herod, they can say here and elsewhere that they can refer to him as on high, as above them, which of course makes him visible, especially visible at the center of the play. This becomes very important later, because when Herod sends the soldiers out to do their evil work. That is, to slaughter every male child ages 2 and under in Bethlehem. That is the slaughter of the innocents, based on a very short passage in the Bible, which you can look up if you wish in drbo.org. We get 2 Latin stage directions that might otherwise confuse us. So at line 192 plus SD, whoops, sorry, my bad. Sorry again about the confusing PDF I sent you. At line 192 plus SD here, the stage direction is tunc ibut milites simul. Then the soldiers will go together. The soldiers will go together. Then at line 256 plus SD, you get tunc ibunt milites et veniet angelus. Then the soldiers will go and the angel will come. Remember, all the Latin notation in these texts, including the speech headings like angelus, is simple and straightforward enough that you can just plug it into the Whitaker's Words website that I introduced in the first few weeks of class. Or you can just guess at it if you wish. So we have this doubled ibunt stage direction, tunc ibunt milites here, and earlier tunc ibunt milites. The soldiers go, then the soldiers go. And this has confused prior editors who decide that this must have been an error that the copyists made, because the soldiers can't exit twice, they say. But using a carriage stage in an urban street, of course they have to exit twice, just as they entered twice. They here exit from the carriage stage, and then later they exit from the street. Let me say that again. First, they exit from the carriage stage to the street. Then they exit from the street to someplace hidden, so that in this case the focus can switch to the angel's scene, the scene between the angel Joseph and Mary. Perceiving those extraverbal cues is very important, because it explains why the soldiers' style of speaking shifts so drastically as soon as they step down from the carriage. On the carriage, when they're receiving their orders, they are sullen and duly resistant to their very unusual orders. Here at line 135, that's actually at line 153. The primus milis, the first soldier, says, "Alas, Lord!" Parrot has just said, "All knave children you must slay this night." And the primus milis says, "Alas, Lord and King of bliss, sent you after us for this? A villainy it were, likewise, for my fellow and me to slay a shitten-assed shrew. A lad his head might off hew. For we are not ribbots," ribbot is a sort of like schmuck, "in this row, but we are knights of great degree." Okay, that's a fair protest, but off the wagon, as soon as they step down from the wagon, they change their tone drastically. As they have promised to search Bethlehem by and by, and all about, they are much bolder. Because when you are performing at street level, you can't do anything understated. Everything becomes cartoonish. Line 193, and suddenly so. "But look, you array yourself richly, because I am bound for the borough of Bethlehem." The you he is speaking to is not the already richly arrayed Herod, of course, but it's you. It's the audience in the street and the platea with him. "With this spear," he holds up his spear clearly, "I think to assault, to kill many a small twerp." Conjun is twerp, let's say. "If any black-lipped boys be in my way, they shall regret it, by Mahound, though all the world might say nay." Again, remember, he is surrounded by people walking among or near them. "All the world might say nay, I myself shall ding them all down. If you will know what I am called, my name is Sir Waradrink the Knight. Against me no man dare fight," etc., etc., etc. Think about it. He's in the street now, for a sustained little scene, with a fake spear, being fake scary, and he is threatening these conjunts, these twerps, right here. The crowd in the streets is all ages, of course. So you can imagine the kind of haunted house-style interaction going on here, as he stalks through an urban crowd trying to find and frighten the children. No wonder his performance style has shifted toward the cartoonish. The second knight, Secundus Milis, does the same. Another attention grabber, arrogantly, "Therefore to me take good keep, my name is Sir Grimbled Lanterdeep. They that me bother, anyone who bothers me, I will lay to sleep on every side." Get it? On every side. You get the implicit spatial cues for street interaction here? The second soldier says, "Without boast," Yeah, sure, buddy. That he would take on the King of Scots and all his host, as if they were right here. Here, here, here. Notice the number of times, by the way, that repeat the word here. This is supposed to be happening along the roads of Judea, near Bethlehem, on the Arab Peninsula, in a historical age well before anyone there could possibly know of the Scots, if there were even Scottish kings yet at all. Here we have a willful, playful, knowing anachronism, one of many, that punctures the already thin sense that these players are anywhere other than present day or then present day Chester. They're playing an elaborate game of pretend for the amusement and enlivenment of all. We already know that all medieval plays maintain only the thinnest sense of realism, if even that. But here, in the street, the text cues the actors to most actively push against the rules of pretend, toward willful inconsistency and purposeful anti-realism. Everything is tongue-in-cheek, as you'll see when you read it more closely if you haven't already. The boastful soldiers say again and again that they do not boast. They boldly announce their names, but these are different names from the names that they were introduced with earlier in the scene. Did you notice that? Because no one actually cares what their real names are, just as the name of the quack doctor in the Croxton play The Sacrament changes randomly. And after wending on their way for a while, in and about or by and by all about Bethlehem, boasting about not boasting again here at line, here we go, not for no boast, at lines 244 to 45, they turn around and say farewell to Herod again. And Herod responds in kind, even though Herod is supposed to be miles away by now. Now notice here, the first soldier is talking about finding an enemy, he says maybe even Samson, in his way right here. So he is very clearly already on the way to where Herod has sent him miles away. And then he talks to Herod. Because even though the story puts Herod miles away and centuries away from present-day Chester in biblical Judea, we all know that we are in England and right here, right now, where we can see both actors quite clearly. This moment is what really has made prior editors think of this repeated exit cue as an error, because the scene here truly bursts open any attempt at realism. But when you have something like this stage direction, which is repeated the same way across all 5 surviving copies of the Chester plays, as this scene and its stage directions are, it's far less likely to be an oversight. The copyists elsewhere catch and correct far less egregious inconsistencies than this. I argue that this is a stylistic choice. They're doing this on purpose. It is a decision, and they do it elsewhere in the play, you'll see. It is a decision to make light of the already thin pretense that the role play has set up. Right? I've gone on this journey. Okay, Herod, who was miles away? You got it. Yeah, we can see each other. Okay, bye. Right? Especially when the action moves into the street, the cartoonish silliness is the most reliably visible. Now that brings us to an important crux. Just before line 289, on the next page here, there's a long Latin stage direction with a big technical effect. Cadet aliqua statua sive imago. Some statue or image must fall, which symbolizes the imminent defeat of Herod and his pagan power. Remember, this effect has to be repeated across 5 locations in the city, so it has to be technically precise and repeatable, right? To make a big statue or big image fall again and again requires some technical know-how. Thus, the Latin adds et si fuere poterit, and if it can be done. This is also happening during the angel's song, suggesting that the effect required considerable doing and wasn't always doable. Such an effect, like a throne, would have to be attached to the carriage stage. It is at this point that the first soldier says, "Have done, fellows, hie fast. We're off to kill the children. So we will go among them, go we them among, those who go so fast about us." We've clearly gone back into the street here, and it makes sense because what was just happening is on the carriage, so now the action shifts into the street. Notice that the other manuscripts in the variants have the soldiers yelling, "Haste down," sometimes multiple times. Haste down, haste down, haste down. Repeated haste down multiple times. The only place we can rush down into among people who so fast go around us is the street. So this subsequent scene involves no special effects nor pre-installed set pieces. Not until the scene shifts again at the end. We see another ebit instead of ebunt. One person is going. Here after line 392. Then she will go, the second woman, secunda mulier, the second woman will go to Herod. This is the second woman, the second mulier, secunda mulier, who had been taking care of the children, and she rushes off to tell Herod that his own son was among the victims. She rushes off to his hall. See here, his hall. And we know that his hall has specifically been established on the carriage stage by permanently installed set pieces. We also know that when Herod dies of dies of grief here, he makes a sign as though he is dying. He is dragged off to hell by a demon, an effect that can only be done on the carriage stage, probably using a trapdoor. You'll see that the Dyer's Antichrist play has effects that likely use trapdoors too. It follows then that this intervening scene that we've just cut over, right? So the scene has at its beginning something with the carriage, at its ending something with the carriage, and this is what comes in between, right? In that intervening scene, which begins with haste down and ends with I'm going to go from here to Herod's hall, it seems most likely, almost certainly, to be happening in the street. A location that we know anti-realism takes over, right? Realism gives way to the ridiculous. With ease, things get especially cartoonish and crazy. The scene, as you'll see, or may already have seen, is jam-packed as well with over-the-top insults that the women, the muliers, right, hurl at the attacking soldiers, the melees, right? So they call them rotten hunter, stitten stallion. They call them stick-toed twice. They call them ribbit, even though they denied being ribbits before, foul harlot, and scabbed dog. Elsewhere here, which you'll see in the variants when they call him scabbed dog. Actually, most of the manuscripts have them call him scabbed bitch. And one even makes fun here of his mom. Whom's thou call queen, scabbed dog? Right, so scabbed dog here is scabbed bitch in manuscripts A, R, B, and H. They are the majority there. Whom callst thou queen, scabbed bitch? Your dame, you dastard, or your bastard, or who knows what she's saying, was never such. We actually don't really know entirely, I think. She burned a kiln, each stick, yet I never did. Is she insulting him by saying your mother was an alewife, your mother was a tapster? It's possible that's an insult. Or is she insulting him by saying your mother had an STI? She burned a kiln, if you know what I mean. The possibility is there for both. The scene is even more jam-packed with physical comedy. And I'm not going to show you why I feel that this scene is jam-packed with physical comedy, because you should be well positioned now, especially after our discussion of the Noah play, to recognize an implicit cue for a woman to hit a male character. In this scene alone, and when I say the scene, I mean from line 289 through line 392, I count at least 11 distinct cues for the women to hit the soldiers. Just pointing there. See if you see more than 11, right? So across the scene, I count 11. The thing is, this zany, physical comedy, over-the-top scene is, of course, the scene that depicts the children being killed.